I hadn't seen him in 6 years. Then he showed up at my front door with a clipboard, a set of car keys, and a face I used to know better than my own. He said, "Get in. I'm your instructor now." I almost said no. I should have said no, because the last time we were alone together, something happened that neither of us ever talked about again. And for 6 years, I convinced myself I imagined it. Now, he was going to be in a car with me 3 days a week, close enough to touch, close enough to remember. I told myself I could handle it. I told myself it was just driving lessons. I was wrong about almost everything that summer. But what happened next changed my life forever. My mother booked the lessons before I even agreed to take them. "You're 24, Eli," she said, sliding a business card across the kitchen table like she was closing a deal. "It's time." I looked down at the card. Coastline Driving Academy. Instructor, Marcus Reyes. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with parallel parking. "Marcus Reyes," I said carefully. As in Danny's old friend, yes. She said it so lightly, like she hadn't just detonated something in my chest. "He started his own business 2 years ago. Your brother ran into him at the hardware store and mentioned you still didn't have your license." Small world. Small world. Cruel world was more accurate. I hadn't spoken to Marcus since I was 18. Since the night before he left for the Coast Guard training program, when we sat on the hood of his car under a sky so full of stars it looked fake, and something passed between us that I never found the courage to name. He'd been Danny's best friend since middle school, practically a second brother to our whole family, and out of our house, so often he had his own mug in the cabinet. And for one night, right before he vanished from my life, I thought he might have felt what I felt. Then he left. No calls. No texts that meant anything. Just silence dressed up as busy. I told myself it was nothing. A confused kid's imagination on a warm night. Easier than admitting I'd built a version of him in my head that never existed. Now he was standing in my driveway. He looked older. Of course he did. 6 years does that. But it was more than time. His shoulders had filled out under a gray Academy polo, and there was a steadiness to him that hadn't been there before, like the ocean had worn the nervous edges off him. His dark hair was shorter. His jaw had a shadow of stubble that made him look like someone's responsible older brother, which, infuriatingly, made him more attractive, not less. Eli. He said my name like he was testing whether it still fit in his mouth. "Marcus." I stayed on the porch steps. Safer distance. "Didn't know you were the instructor type. Didn't know you still couldn't drive." A small smile. Careful, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to tease me yet. "I've been busy." 6 years busy? I didn't answer that. He didn't push. We stood there a beat too long, both of us recalibrating, both of us pretending this was simple. Then he held up the keys, and something about the gesture, casual, practiced 100 students before me, made it clear that to him, this really might just be a job. That stung more than I expected. "You coming?" he asked. "Or are we doing this from a porch?" I came. The car smelled like his cologne, something clean and citrus that hit me with a memory so specific. His car, senior year, driving me home from a party because Danny was too drunk to, that I had to look out the window to compose myself. "Seatbelt," he said, not unkindly like he said it to every student, and I hated how much I wanted it to mean something else. We didn't talk much that first lesson. He was professional, clipped instructions, patient corrections, a hand that hovered near the wheel but never touched it. I stalled twice at the same intersection, and he didn't laugh, which somehow made it worse. At the end, idling back in my driveway, he finally let the silence stretch into something real. "You're better than you think," he said. "You just don't trust yourself." I looked at him. That an instructor thing to say, or a you thing to say? Something flickered across his face, gone before I could name it. "Same time Thursday," he said, and that was all. I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes after he drove away, gripping a steering wheel that wasn't even mine, trying to figure out how a person could feel like a stranger and like coming home in the exact same breath. By the third lesson, I'd learned 2 things. 1, Marcus Reyes was a genuinely excellent driving instructor. Calm under pressure, precise with his corrections, never once raising his voice even when I nearly clipped a mailbox in a school zone. 2, He still had the exact same nervous habit of tapping 2 fingers against his knee when he was thinking of something he wasn't going to say. I noticed it every time. "You're staring at my hand," he said, eyes still on the road as I merged onto the highway on-ramp, too fast then too slow. Then finally right. "I'm making sure you're not about to grab the wheel. I trust you. You don't sound like you trust me." "I do." He said it plainly, no teasing in it this time, and I felt it land somewhere under my ribs. "You're careful. You always were. Careful people make good drivers. Careful people also make good liars," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was heavier than any of our others. "What's that supposed to mean?" he said finally. I signaled, changed lanes, kept my eyes forward because it was easier than looking at him. "Nothing. Forget it." He didn't forget it. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers stopped tapping and went still on his knee instead. We finished the lesson in near silence, and when he dropped me home, he didn't drive off right away like usual. He sat there, engine idling, both hands on the wheel now instead of one. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My pulse picked up. "Sure. Why did Mom really book these lessons? You've had 6 years to learn to drive. Why now?" It wasn't the question I expected, and somehow that made it harder to answer honestly. "She worries. I work nights at the hospital pharmacy. The bus routes got cut back. She doesn't like me walking home at 2 a.m. I paused. That's the real reason, not some big conspiracy. I didn't think it was a conspiracy. He looked at me then, really looked, in a way he'd been carefully avoiding for 2 weeks. I just wondered if she knew about us running into each other again, if she thought about what that might be like. "For you." My throat went tight. "You think about what it's like?" "For you, I mean, every single lesson," he said quietly, and then, like he'd surprised himself by saying it out loud, he looked away fast, back at the wheel, jaw working. "Sorry. That's not. I shouldn't have said that. Forget I said that." I didn't forget it. I thought about it the entire walk up my driveway, the entire night, lying awake replaying 6 words that shouldn't have meant as much as they did. Every single lesson. I wasn't imagining anything 6 years ago, and I definitely wasn't imagining this. I didn't bring it up at our next lesson. Neither did he. Instead, we fell into something almost normal, routine, structured, safe. He taught me how to parallel park using a landmark trick his own instructor had taught him 15 years ago. I taught him without meaning to that I still laughed at the same terrible jokes I'd laughed at when I was 18, the kind that made him groan and shake his head and eventually laugh anyway. It was the laughing that undid me. Because in between the driving instructions, in between the mirror checks and blind spot reminders, Marcus started to feel less like a stranger wearing a familiar face and more like the boy who used to sit on my porch steps until midnight because he said our house felt more like home than his own. One evening, a July storm caught us mid-lesson, rain hammering the windshield so hard I had to pull into a grocery store parking lot and wait it out. The wipers stopped. The world outside blurred into gray streaks and headlights. "You remember the night before I left?" Marcus asked, out of nowhere, staring straight ahead at the rain. My chest tightened. "Which part?" "You know which part." I did. Every second of it. The hood of his car. The stars. The way his hand had found mine in the dark. Fingers lacing through fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Right before he pulled back like he'd touched a live wire. "I remember," I said. "I've thought about that night more than I've thought about almost anything," he admitted, voice low. "I thought about it in basic training. I thought about it on deployment. I thought about it every single time I almost called you and didn't. Why didn't you? Because I was 22 and terrified, and you were 18 and Danny's little brother, and I told myself it wasn't fair to either of us for me to want what I wanted." He finally turned to look at me, and because I thought if I called, I'd say something I couldn't take back, and you deserved better than a coward calling from 4 states away. 6 years of silence, and that was the reason. Not indifference. Fear. "You could have just told me that," I said, and my voice cracked more than I wanted it to. "Instead of just disappearing." "I know." He looked wrecked by it. Genuinely, the guilt sitting heavy on his face. "I know, Eli. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I needed you to know it wasn't nothing. It was never nothing." The rain kept falling. The windows kept fogging at the edges. And for one long, suspended moment. I thought he might close the distance between us the way he almost had 6 years ago. Instead, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, jaw tightening in a way I was starting to recognize as his tell for bad news. And something shifted behind his eyes. "I have to take this," he said, and stepped out into the rain to answer it. Through the fog window, I watched his shoulders go rigid, watched him run a hand over his face, watched him say something short and clip before hanging up and standing there in the downpour for a long moment before getting back in the car, soaked, jaw set. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said, too fast. "Family stuff." He didn't elaborate. And for the first time since the lesson started, I felt him build a wall between us in real time, brick by brick right there in the front seat. He canceled the next lesson, texted an apology that felt more like an evasion. Same the lesson after that. I asked Danny about it, trying to sound casual over dinner. "You talked to Marcus lately?" I asked, pushing rice around my plate. Danny shrugged. "Not really." "Why?" "No reason." But Danny, older brother, terrible poker face, squinted at me like he was doing math he didn't like the answer to. "You two good?" He said something about your lessons a few weeks back. Sounded weird about it. Weird how? We're like a guy who's thinking about something he shouldn't be. Danny said it slowly, watching my face. "You gonna tell me what's going on? Or am I gonna have to guess?" I didn't answer. Danny didn't push, but the look he gave me, not angry, just careful, thoughtful, told me he'd already guessed more than I wanted him to. 2 days later, Marcus texted, "Can we talk?" Not about driving. We met at the pier instead of in the car, both of us needing, I think, to be somewhere that wasn't a metal box built for lessons and rules. The evening was warm, gulls crying overhead, the boardwalk lights just starting to flicker on. "My dad's sick," Marcus said, without preamble, staring out at the water. "That call in the storm. He collapsed at work. They think it's his heart." "Marcus, I'm so sorry." I pulled back from you because I panicked. He continued, like he needed to get all of it out before he lost his nerve. "Not because of what you think. Because the second I let myself want something again, really want it, I got scared that everything good in my life gets taken away. My dad, my mom when I was a kid. I left for the Coast Guard because staying still felt dangerous, like if I let myself have something real, I'd lose it. And now I'm terrified I'm about to lose my father. And the only person I wanted to call, the only person I actually wanted next to me, was you. And that terrified me more than the diagnosis did." I stood there, wind pulling at both of us. And for the first time in 6 years, I understood him, not the careful instructor, not the ghost from my memory, but the actual person underneath. "You don't have to run from wanting something good," I said quietly, "just because good things sometimes end. That's not a reason to never have them, Marcus. That's a reason to hold on tighter while you can." He looked at me like I'd said something he'd needed to hear for a very long time. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "I don't know how to stay." "Then maybe," I said, closing the distance between us for the first time in 6 years, "we figure it out together." His hand found mine on the railing, fingers lacing through fingers, exactly the way they had that night on the hood of his car. Except this time he didn't pull away. For 2 weeks, everything felt like it was finally clicking into place. Real driving lessons in the mornings, quiet dinners at my place in the evenings, hospital visits with his father squeezed in between where I sat in the waiting room so Marcus wouldn't have to sit there alone. His father, Antonio, was a gruff, kind man who took one look at me holding his son's hand in the hallway and said, finally, like he'd been waiting 6 years for this exact moment, which, as it turned out, he had. "Marcus talked about you the whole time he was away," Antonio told me one afternoon while Marcus was getting coffee. "Never said your name, mind you. Just someone back home." We all knew who he meant. I didn't know what to do with that information except carry it around like something precious. But good things I was learning rarely arrive without complications. Marcus's mother called from 3 states away, the one who'd left when he was 12, the wound he'd mentioned once and never elaborated on, saying she wanted to come see Antonio. Marcus went quiet for 2 full days after that call, tapping his fingers against his knee more than I'd ever seen, and when I asked what was wrong, he shut down instead of opening up. "I don't want to talk about her," he said flatly, one evening on my porch, the same porch I realized where this had all started 6 years ago. "You don't have to talk about her," I said, "but don't shut me out either. That's how we lost 6 years the first time. He looked at me, something raw crossing his face. I'm trying, Eli. I've never done this before. Actually letting someone in when things get hard. I don't have a map for this. Then let's make one, I said. Together. As we go. He exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders, and for a long moment we just sat there, his head eventually finding my shoulder, mine resting against his hair, the porch light casting the same warm gold it always had. I love you, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I think I've loved you since I was 22 and too scared to say it. I'm saying it now. My chest ached with how long I'd waited to hear those words, and how easily they came once he finally let them. I love you too, I said. I never stopped. It should have been the beginning of something uncomplicated. It wasn't. His mother arrived on a Tuesday. I wasn't there for that first conversation, but I was there for the aftermath. Marcus showing up at my door at 11 at night, eyes red-rimmed, saying nothing, just needing somewhere to sit that wasn't the hospital or his childhood house full of ghosts. She wants to reconnect, he said finally, bitterness threading through the word. After 12 years. Now, while my dad's in a hospital bed and can't even argue with her about it. How do you feel about that? Angry, relieved, confused. He dragged a hand through his hair. I don't know how to hold all of it at once. You don't have to hold it alone. I know. He looked at me, something shifting behind his eyes, gratitude, maybe, or disbelief that this was allowed to be real. That's the part I'm still learning. The weeks that followed tested that lesson more than either of us expected. Marcus split himself between his father's recovery, his mother's cautious reentry into his life, and our relationship, new enough to still feel fragile, old enough to already matter more than almost anything. I watched him try to hold it all together and slowly start to crack under the weight of it, canceling dates, going quiet mid-conversation, disappearing into himself the way he had after the storm. I recognized the pattern now. I understood where it came from. That didn't make it easy to watch. You're pulling away again, I told him one night, gently but honestly, after he'd missed our dinner for the third time that week without a real explanation. I'm not asking you to be perfect, Marcus. I'm asking you to let me actually be there instead of guessing from the outside. I don't want to be a burden to you, he said. You've got your own life, your job. I don't want you to feel like all you do is manage my crisis. I don't feel that way, I said. I feel like you're the person I chose. Crisis included. That's what this is, if you let it be. He looked at me for a long moment, something breaking open in his expression. I don't know how to believe that someone actually wants to stay. Then let me show you, I said, instead of you deciding for both of us that I won't. It was the most honest fight we'd had, and somehow the closest we'd ever felt. Antonio's recovery was slow but steady. His mother stayed longer than Marcus expected. Not repaired, not forgiven, but present in a way that cracked something loose in him he hadn't realized was still frozen shut. She apologized, he told me one evening, disbelief still coloring his voice. Actually apologized. For leaving. For not calling. 12 years, and she finally said the words. How did it feel? Like I've been carrying a weight so long I forgot it wasn't part of me, he said. And now it's just gone. Mostly gone. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. You don't have to figure it out today. I know. He smiled. A real one, the kind that reaches eyes. You keep reminding me of that. I think I needed someone to keep reminding me of that. Something had genuinely shifted in him over the past month. Not because his life had gotten simpler, but because he'd finally let someone stand next to him inside the mess of it instead of managing it alone from behind a wall. My own driving test came up in the middle of all this, almost comically small next to everything else happening, and yet it mattered enormously to me because it was ours, the thing that had brought us back together. Nervous? Marcus asked, the morning of the test, both of us standing beside the DMV parking lot. Terrified, I admitted, you're a good teacher. I don't want to embarrass you. You could never embarrass me. He straightened my collar, unnecessary but tender. You already did the hardest part, Eli. You let me back in after I gave you every reason not to. Parallel parking's easy after that. I passed. Not perfectly. I clipped the curb once, and the examiner made a face I chose not to interpret. But I passed, and when I walked out with my temporary license in hand, Marcus was waiting exactly where he said he'd be, exactly like he'd promised he would from now on. He kissed me right there in the DMV parking lot, in front of God and every stranger walking to their cars, like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission to do in daylight. "I'm proud of you," he said against my forehead, "for the test, and for not giving up on me." I never really considered it, I admitted, even when I should have. Autumn came, and with it the ordinary rhythms of a real relationship. The kind that isn't cinematic every single day, the kind built out of grocery runs and late shifts and falling asleep on the couch halfway through a movie neither of us finished. Antonio, fully recovered, insisted on cooking us dinner every Sunday, a tradition that had started as gratitude and calcified into something neither of us wanted to give up. Marcus's mother visited twice more. Awkward, imperfect, but present, which was more than either of them had expected 6 months earlier. Coastline Driving Academy grew. Marcus hired a second instructor, which meant fewer hours behind the wheel and more hours simply being together without a clipboard between us. One evening, driving home from his father's, me behind the wheel now, easily like I've been doing it for years instead of months, Marcus reached over and rested his hand on my knee, the same nervous tap of 2 fingers, except now it wasn't nerves. It was just habit, just comfort, just him. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Always. I used to think staying still was dangerous, that if I let myself want something, I'd lose it, so it was safer to keep moving, keep leaving before anything could leave me first." He looked out at the passing streetlights. "I don't feel that way anymore. Being here, with you in this stupid car that started this whole thing, it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like the first safe thing I've ever let myself have." I pulled in my driveway, the one where this all began, where he'd once stood with a clipboard and a careful smile and 6 years of things unsaid between us, and put the car in park. "I used to think I imagined that night on the hood of your car," I said. "I spent 6 years convincing myself it wasn't real, because it hurt less than believing it was real and you'd left anyway." "It was real," he said. "It was always real. I was just too scared to prove it." "You proved it," I said. "Every day since the storm." He smiled, the porch light catching the same warm gold it always had, 6 years and a lifetime away from where we started. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, echoing the words he used to say at the end of every lesson, except now they meant something else entirely. Not an instructor scheduling his next student, but a man who intended to keep showing up every day for as long as I'd let him. "Same time tomorrow," I said, "and the day after that, and the one after that." He leaned across the console and kissed me, slow and certain, in the exact spot where a nervous, careful boy once wondered if he'd only imagined being wanted. He hadn't imagined it. He never had.